What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Running back rankings tier 2. This is actually a really important range to go over because basically everyone has the same top 5, right? The top 3 is pretty clearly McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, and then I have it Kamara and then Dalvin Cook at 4 and 5. Some people have Cook over Kamara. I like Kamara more. But it's once you get into this 6 through 13 range that everyone starts to differ. So we'll go over what I have and why I have it ranked this way. Obviously, we're only doing 6 through 13. So if you want to see the rest of my running back rankings along with all other positions, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So we will start things off today with, of course, the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was among running backs with at least 150 carries who faced 8+ defenders in the box on the highest percent of their carries. The answer was Frank Gore. Today's stat: over the second half last season, the top 4 quarterbacks in fantasy points per game were Lamar Jackson, Ryan Tannehill, Drew Brees, and Jameis Winston, who was 5th. So who is 5th in that range? All right, let's go over tier 2. We're going to start things off at the running back 6, and that's Derrick Henry. He just misses out on landing in tier 1 for a few reasons, and while some of those reasons are a bit thin, I personally think it's enough to bump him out of tier 1 into tier 2, but being the first running back in tier 2 and still a first round running back everywhere. So the first one is the one everyone knows, of course. It's the reception ceiling. He has 57 career receptions, and while this could certainly be the season he finally reaches 20, they drafted Darrynton Evans to play on third downs. And if the Titans didn't use Derrick Henry last season in the receiving game, they probably never will. It was set up perfectly for them to feature him, and they didn't. He's also facing pretty clear touchdown regression. He scored 6.2 rushing touchdowns over expectation last season. But you really shouldn't need to hear me say that. I mean, when you look at anyone who rushes for 16 touchdowns, the first thing you should think of is, yeah, that's probably on the high end of their range of outcomes. It doesn't necessarily mean they got lucky, but they probably over time will score a little bit less than that. Right? It's pretty difficult to repeat 16 rushing touchdowns year over year. Also, the offense as a whole is facing a little bit of regression. They ranked 5th in touchdowns and points per play, which we might expect a team to repeat that over time if they were full of elite players. They always rank that high, really good offenses year over year. But the Titans are not that. They're much more likely to finish closer to league average than they are finishing the top 5 in those categories. So all of this is to say, he's going to be great. He's going to see around 300 touches, and that's why he's going in the first round, and he should go in the first round. But I think leading off tier 2 as running back 6 is the correct spot for him, because if you look at the running backs going after him, no one really touches his touch upside, right? They all have really nice ceilings, but we know Henry's going to touch the ball 20 to 22 times per game, and that's just extremely valuable in fantasy, even if most of those are carries. But if you look at the guys ahead of him, they're also going to see a lot of touches and a lot of touchdown upside, but they all have a ton of reception upside, and I just don't think you can put Henry into the same tier as them. So that's why I have him as 6th, first guy in tier 2. At 7th, second player in tier 2 is J.Mixon, which is actually fairly controversial. Some people have him this high, of course, but then there are a lot of people who are down on him this season, and their main reasoning is that he's never really earned this ranking. Everyone ranked above him has had a season that justifies that ranking, but Mixon really hasn't. Since his rookie season in 2017, he's finished as the running back 31, 9, and 17 in points per game. And while he is an excellent pass catcher, he's only commanded 3 to 4 targets per game in his career. So when you look at it that way, it's pretty easy to see why some people are down on him. You know, they know he's a good running back. They know that he's going to have a role, but he hasn't shown to be worth this yet. So why take the risk that early that he's just not as good as we're making it seem? But you guys have heard me say this before. We're not drafting people based on what they did in the past. We like to draft people based on what we expect from them moving forward. Look at a player like DK Metcalf. He was 42nd in points per game last season, and he commanded double-digit targets in just 2 of 18 games, because of course they had 2 playoff games. Yet he's universally ranked inside the top 25. Why? Because we expect him to be better this season. You know that intuitively. Rookie wide receivers typically aren't going to have the best season of their career in their first year, and he looks like an athletic freak. And we figure he's going to get more targets this year. So, yeah, he's going to be higher than the wide receiver 42 in points per game. I'm not saying Mixon was a rookie last year, because he wasn't. This is going to be his 4th season in the league. But he's also 24. He's just reaching the age apex. And I think it's a similar thing with Mixon, that if you look at the past, it's been very difficult for him to produce. I mean, since he joined the league, the Bengals have always been a below average offense. And in the 1 year that they weren't bottom 7, that's when he finished 9th in points per game. Because remember, it's extremely difficult for a running back to perform well in fantasy on a team that's terrible. So it's not shocking that he could only reach 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns last year, since they ranked 28th in yards per play, 30th in scoring, 31st in touchdowns per game, and the last in points per play. Those are all going to improve this season, and that means there'll be more yards. That means there'll be more touchdowns to go around. Plus another thing on the touchdowns, scoring 8 touchdowns on a team that ranked second to last in touchdowns per game is pretty solid, right? And then maybe you look at that and you say, well, didn't he get lucky? No, he was actually unlucky to only score 8. He had 9.4 expected rushing touchdowns, because the 8 includes receiving touchdowns, meaning on average, he should have scored 12.4. So if on average, he should have scored 12.4 total touchdowns on a team that ranked 31st in touchdowns per game, we need to assume that his touchdown ceiling is very, very high. And it is, because if you watch any of their games, you know they feature him in the red zone. And if you look at adding 4.3 extra touchdowns, those are the touchdowns he should have scored on average on the ground last season, 4.3 more than the 5 that he did, his points per game would have gone from 17th to 12th. And that might not seem like a big difference, but finishing as a low-end running back 1 in points per game on that offense would have been extremely impressive. They were so bad last season. And also, people like to point to the fact that he performed poorly as the featured back, right? We say he's going to be the guy this season. We think that he's going to get the vast majority of the touches and the work. And people say, well, he already has been. That's not entirely accurate. Bernard had 27.5 snaps per game last season, which is just 13 fewer than Mixon. However, that split grew over the second half of the season when the Bengals decided they were going to feature Joe Mixon. Bernard dropped from 30 to 25 snaps per game, and Mixon climbed from 37 to 45. And in his new featured role, Mixon's points per game went up from 8.8 to 17, actually ranking 5th in points per game among all running backs in the second half of the season, only behind Henry, McCaffrey, Zeke, and Drake. He's actually shown that he is worth this ranking, just not over a full season. But I think that changes this year because remember, like I said, he just turned 24 last week. And with Bernard turning 29 and no other running back of consequence on the roster, there's no reason the Bengals will not feature Mixon this season. So I think he's going to get a boatload of touches, a boatload of scoring opportunities, and those are the players I want in the first round. So 7th overall for Joe Mixon. 8th overall and 9th overall. And when I say overall, it's actually running back. This is a running back video. There are wide receivers that go ahead. But 8th and 9th is M.Sanders and K.Drake. And I'm actually not going to go over these two that much because I just posted an in-depth breakdown on why I have these two exact players ranked here. So if you want to see that, it's a 12-minute video. It goes over just these two players. I don't want to talk about the exact same points over again, but I will in short. So in a short summary of why these two players are here, Sanders has a more clear path to the featured role than Drake does, and he will likely see more touches overall as a result. Both of them will be heavily involved in the red zone, but over time we do expect Sanders to score slightly more touchdowns than Drake. And then finally, it's the risk. Sanders is a little bit less risky than Drake. He actually ranks as my third safest running back behind McCaffrey and Zeke, because there's literally nothing you can point to with Sanders that adds a bunch of risk. He's a very safe pick. And since the upside of these two players is identical, I want the player with the higher median outcome and then slightly less risk, and that's Sanders. But overall, I love both of these guys. And you've seen in a bunch of different mock drafts from different points, I end up with these two on a lot of teams. And I am perfectly comfortable leaving the first two rounds with Sanders and Drake if you've got a late first round pick. So I think they're both excellent picks because they have a great combination of rushing, receiving, and touchdown upside. I just slightly prefer Sanders if you are deciding between the two of them. At running back 10, I have N.Chubb, and I do think this is the correct ranking on Chubb. His lack of receiving upside is why I just can't move him ahead of Sanders and Drake, but his total touches and his touchdown upside makes it so I can't really justify moving him any lower than this. So Chubb ranked second in expected rushing touchdowns last season, and that was on a team that had a much worse offensive line. Obviously the same team, but we know that the Browns are probably the team that improved the most of any team in their offensive line. They were a bad offensive line last season, and they're actually going to be solid this year. So being second in expected rushing touchdowns on a team that was really bad with their offensive line, and they ranked 22nd in points per game, well, that's pretty good. And if you look at the Vegas over-unders, you got Derrick Henry at the top, and then it's Zeke and Chubb right behind him. So he could be the league leader in rushing yards. And now, while that's not the end-all, be-all, it makes sense, right? I mean, he had 1,500 rushing yards last season, even with Cleveland ranking 22nd in yards per game and having, like I said, the terrible offensive line, and also not winning as many games as we thought they would, which is always a benefit to a running back. You know, when you've got a game that you're up by 10 in the fourth quarter, they're going to run the ball a lot more. Well, they didn't have as many of those as we thought they would last season, but we expect them to be a little bit better this year. And so if they can win a few more games, or at least be up late in a few more games, well, then that's going to be a positive for Chubb. So I really think that it's only Zeke and Henry who rival him on the ground. So I think the running back 10 is a really nice spot for him because the receiving upside's a concern, but he's going to get so much work on the ground that you really just can't move him up or down from here. At running back 11, I have J.Jacobs. I really hope that the Raiders realize what they have in this kid. He's so special. He's such a good running back. I want them to just feature him. Just don't take him off the field. He's that good. Unfortunately, I don't think they're going to do that. He did finish 6th on the team in targets last year with just 27. And while there have been reports that they want to use him more in the receiving game, we heard things like that last year too. And teams lie all the time. Where they don't lie is with money and draft capital. When they spend money on a player or they spend a high pick on a player, those are the things we look for. We don't look for this coach speak. And they gave Jalen Richard an extension. They spent their 3rd round pick on Lynn Bowden. That in no way tells me that they want to feature Jacobs. If they were planning on featuring Jacobs, they would not have done both of those two things. Maybe they only extend Richard, or they only give Lynn Bowden, or I guess draft Lynn Bowden. But doing both of them just screams to me they want Jacobs to be mostly a 1st and 2nd down back, and that's why I can't move him any higher than this because he is definitely behind Chubb on the ground. In fact, I am considering moving him back to the running back 12 and moving Clyde Edwards-Helaire up to the running back 11. You've heard me say this a million times, but Clyde's value and your decision to draft him comes down to whether or not you think he's going to get more or less than 12 touches per game. If you think he's going to see in that 8 to 10 range, don't draft him. That's a decision you need to make. There's still plenty of other great running backs in this range. But if you think that he sees 12 or more, you have to draft him. And just for context, there have been 9 first-round running backs since 2013. Among those 9, only Christian McCaffrey and Rashard Penny had fewer than 215 touches in their rookie season, which, if you look at 215, is nearly 13.5 per game. And McCaffrey made up for that with 80 receptions. Like, he had less than 215 touches, but 80 of them came through the air, so that's great for fantasy because obviously you want a reception instead of a carry. And while Penny ranks really low, a lot of that was due to the finger and the knee injuries. I mean, he was extremely banged up for his whole rookie season. That number would have looked a lot different if he was fully healthy. So just be aware. If you think that Clyde is going to see fewer than 12 touches a game, you're saying he's an outlier. You're saying that Kansas City would be one of the only teams to draft a first-round running back and then just not use him very much, which would be pretty strange given that his greatest strength is in the receiving game, and we know Damian Williams has never been over 500 rushing yards. I mean, we liked Williams last season solely because he was good in the receiving game and he had the athletic profile to do well if they gave him 12 to 15 touches a game. And we were right. You know, he did well and actually did fantastic in every single game that he had 12 or more touches. He just happened to get hurt to start the season, so his dominance came to end the season and in the playoffs. But don't think for a second that Williams is even remotely as good as Clyde. That'll be evident very quickly, and Clyde's ADP isn't going to skyrocket because there's going to be no preseason. People aren't going to be able to look and be like, oh, that's how good Clyde is? All right, yeah, he's definitely better than Williams. Let's take him in the first round. That's not going to happen. So I'm pretty sure the most likely scenario is that Clyde goes in the top 5 next season after people realize how good he is and people realize that you don't even need to be good to post numbers on this offense at running back. So I would just enjoy the discount on Clyde while you can, because I have seen plenty of leagues where you can get him in the 3rd round, and that's absolutely insane. He should definitely go in the 2nd round at all times, but I think in your hometown leagues, he for sure will go in the 3rd round at times, and that's awesome. So I have him at running back 12, thinking about moving him up to running back 11. Final running back we'll go over today is Austin Ekeler, and I've actually moved him from tier 3 into tier 2 pretty recently. We have Melvin Gordon being gone, and while that doesn't mean he's going to get a bunch more carries, it does mean that the workload is secure, especially because they just gave him a 4-year, $24.5 million contract. And while we think Kelly is going to take some of that work on the ground, it's not like we can know that for sure. I mean, we don't know for sure if Kelly is all that good. And it's not like Justin Jackson is going to take that many carries. I mean, he's smaller than Ekeler. Like, people want to call Ekeler a satellite back. What are you calling Justin Jackson? Because this dude is smaller, and he's honestly not that good. You can point to the yards per carry last season. How many carries did he have? It's not that many. What do you have, like 30 carries? I don't know the exact number. But you can't look at yards per carry in a guy who had very, very few carries, has less than like 100 over his entire career. Justin Jackson is not that good. So Kelly's going to be the backup. But we don't even know if Kelly's that good. So there is a situation where Ekeler could legitimately be the featured back. And I know that the loss of Rivers really hurts him, but they didn't give him this new contract to just not use him. And it's not like he needs to repeat exactly what he did last season to pay off the running back 13 price tag. He was 7th in points per game last year, and that was on only 132 carries for 557 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. So while I expect the receiving numbers to go down, I'd be pretty surprised if those rushing numbers didn't increase, meaning that he'd have to see a massive decrease in receptions to fall into that mid to low end running back 2 range. So getting him as a high end 2 is pretty close to his floor. And given that we also expect the Chargers to want to run the ball this year and lean on their defense to win games, plus we know that Tyrod is going to be a relatively conservative quarterback, so he's probably going to throw some dump offs. Now, I don't want to come out here and say that I expect his rushing to increase and his receiving to increase, because if I thought that, I'd rank him in the top 5, right? Like, I still expect a big decrease in receptions. But he needs to see a massive decrease in receptions to fall way outside. And I think ranking him at the end of tier 2 is the proper spot to put him. So that's why I moved him up into this range. So that'll do it for the running back 6 through 13. Remember to check out our website to see our full rankings across all positions. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.